Welcome to TezTalks Radio, the global Tezos ecosystem podcast hosted by Marissa True and Stu Elms. You're tuning into a special edition episode where we showcase some of the best conversations that took place at the Art Basel speaker series supported by Tezos. Enjoy.
Test. Okay.
Test.
Works. Sabine, does it work? Your microphone?
Test. Yes.
Okay, and we have Linda as well. Hey, Linda.
Hi.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Mikal. I am the founder of Vertical Crypto Art, which is a curatorial media studio for art NFTs. And I am joined today by Robert, Sabine, and Linda. Welcome. First of all, thank you for having us to Tezos. I'm very excited to be here. And we're going to be talking about curating art for Web3. So with this, I'm going to let my beautiful speakers introduce themselves very briefly, and then we'll kick it off. So Robert, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. So hi, guys. I'm pleased to be here. So where to start? I've been in computers forever, and I heard the talk before, someone saying it's all about computers, and this is how I explain it. So I joined the space when I was a little child. My parents got me an Atari 800, and I started as, coding little colorful stripes. And then with 16, I joined a collective that basically started creating artworks based on code, multi-layered Photoshop, and music coding. So that was the demo scene, if you're familiar with that. And what we did is just really creating the early artifacts of art. And it was a multidisciplinary team because, everyone was spread around Europe. And it was so exciting because it was at the time of AOL, right? So still just kind of listening to the sound. And then that brought me to computer science. After that, I spent a lot of time in the music industry. So I was working on licensing agreements, A&R, and then moved or co-founded an arts organization in New York, United Creators, where we provided patronage to emerging artists. So it was the first kind of Web 2 kind of an outlet for artists in 2006. And then 2008, we created a platform called the G-Box, a gallery in the box. And that was sort of kind of a pioneering idea of remote curatorial services. So basically, we leveraged screens in hotels, in other infrastructure, special spaces, to curate artworks. So collaborated with leading hotels of the world and a couple of other infrastructure providers. And then also with the Young Curators Club in Sotheby's and Christie's, who just leveraged that to really, take off the barrier of the artwork, right? So anyway, so that's really it. In 2021, I joined the NFT space, and since then collaborated with a lot of traditional artists.
My name is Sabine Himmelsbach, and I'm the director of HEC, House of Electronic Arts, here in Basel. I'm a trained art historian, very classical background, but media arts has been my passion early on. And then I had the chance through the jobs that I had to also make it part of my career. I have worked for 6 years at the ZKM Center for Art and Media in Karlsruhe, being exhibition director there. Then I was running a smaller institution in the north of Germany, the Edith Ruth site for media art, also with an artist in residence program. And since 2012, I'm here in Basel directing HEC. And HEC is a very unique institution. It's the Center for Competence of Media Arts here in Switzerland. We do exhibiting of on-site and online. We have an educational program very dedicated to making people understand what generative art is, what all these issues. And then thirdly, we are collecting Swiss media art, and here our focus is on software and net-based artistic practices, and of course NFTs are part of that as well. So much. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabine. And Linda?
Hi, everyone. I'm Linda. I'm a Senegalese artist trained as a designer, and I'm also the founder of Cyberbot, a collective of digital artists of African descent that sort of converged in Web3 sometimes around last year. I've been in the NFT space for about almost a year and a half now, which is crazy. But yeah, so prior to the NFT space, I worked as a designer for various studios, such as IDEO, for example. And in the metaverse, I'm sort of both an artist as well as a curator, and also kind of figuring out ways to build a collective of artists through the DAO infrastructure.
And Linda, maybe for the audience, do you want to explain briefly what DAO means? Just so
sure.
that everybody knows what you're actually talking about. Maybe people know, but just to make sure.
Sounds good. So a DAO, or decentralized autonomous organization, is basically analogous to what you would imagine a company to be in the real world, but built for decentralization. So it's a way for people to get together around a particular mission or vision and to action on that sort of in a decentralized way, where the power is not concentrated in a hierarchical manner, but people have various ways to come to decision agreements by voting or by sort of converging in sort of more decentralized decision making.
Thank you. And actually, we'll talk a little bit about what curation within a DAO system and organization means for you and for Cyberbot and for others as well. But yeah, I'm going to maybe start with a first question, which is, what sort of principles do you think are important in your career, in what you've experienced in the past, in terms of curating art that should be brought into Web3? Sabina, I might start with you actually.
Yeah, maybe I start with a project that I have been involved in 1999, and because I think we are in an historical moment that is kind of comparable. In 1999, I was co-curator and producer of the show Net Condition at the ZKM, Center for Art and Media in Karlsruhe. And it was a moment where net art was thriving, but it was not seen in the museum. And then this art, it was a really huge show brought into the museum context, and I think it was very contested at that time, because a lot of artists were saying art is made for the web, why bring it into the museum? But I think I see it as my position as a curator to make a broader audience aware of what is going on in culture and also in digital culture. So in that respect, it really makes sense. And yeah. And I think now, with the Web3 space, there's a lot of learnings to be made for a broader audience, and I think that is important for me as a director of a cultural institution to make, to talk about these things, to make people aware, to give workshops, and to really help them grasp what is happening.
Absolutely. Robert?
Yeah, I think what you would really like to adapt is sort of the idea of patronage in the NFT space, right? And I think this is also something, Linda, that we want to discuss in the context of DAOs, right? That pretty much take also the responsibility and accountability for that. I think everything else you would apply, sort of the art historic context, right? You would also look at the cultural context of any artwork. You would try to cross-reference the art pieces with other curators, artists, art critics, and then go through a curatorial analysis of the process, the work, the execution. I think all of that you find in the traditional art space, you would want to have in the NFT space as well.
And Linda, maybe from your point of view, specifically being almost like a Web3 native kind of curator, working with Super Rare, with Cyberbot, and a lot of the major also marketplaces. What are your thoughts about aspects of curation that you think are fundamental to Web3, and also maybe that you would like to see from the digital art space in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I actually that question made me think a little bit, because when we think about the historical context of art, it hasn't been the kindest to non-Western cultures. And so when you think about art criticism, for example, which takes its modern form in the 18th century, where this around the same time colonization started taking hold all over the world, I think there's an urgency for curators like myself to sort of decolonize and continue the debate of decolonization in the Web3 space, because it's about really like entangling our psyches, our creatives as well as curators, from sort of canons that haven't typically included us or been kind to different perspectives from around the world. So one thing I try to do when working in Web3 as a curator is to try to find perspectives that are typically, marginalized or ignored, or that sort of fall out of view, and try to include them in this new market, because we have a window of opportunity to change some of the things that don't work for us in the traditional art world as like artists of, from the global South. And I think this is our window of opportunity, and it's our role as curators to sort of be very inclusive from the get-go.
Absolutely, a really important point, actually. I think also something that is kind of like interesting, and maybe Sabine, I'll start with you. Like, you've obviously been working with digital artists, like net artists, for a long time. And so what are some of the key factors that you as a curator in the digital art and net art space keep in mind when working with artists? And yeah, talk a little bit maybe about your curatorial experience there.
I mean, for me as a curator, I'm interested in contexts and ideas that are specific for a particular medium. With early net art, it was a discussion about identity, that you can, change your identities on the web, nobody knows. And I tried to find out what are the relevant questions for the artists working in the digital field today. I tried to create stories, create narratives, to give access to certain thematic fields. I think that's important for me. And I'm also interested in the metaverse is many things. It's not just the blockchain. And to also think where the art plays out. I find it interesting that artists like Adi Wagenknecht, for example, years ago with her video tutorials infiltrated YouTube space. And I guess probably a lot of the audience didn't even know they were watching art. They were just watching her tutorial that had always a twist to it and kind of make people think of what they are listening to. And when we started our series titled Hack Networks, which is a commissioning series for online works that may play out on our website, they play out on our socials. We want to create also an online exhibition space starting in the fall. I think it's these surprises, that you go with the art and infiltrate existing spaces.
And Robert, in your view, do you think the role of a curator is changing with Web3, and if so, how?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Starting with Web3, pretty much, it really offers the widest ranges of inclusivity, participation, as we know, right? And all of that on many levels, right? So you could have today an art enthusiast may want to curate their own cyber collection. At the same time, you would have like an art institution like the Tezos Foundation might want to build their own permanent collection, right? So I think that collectors who dedicate their lives for contacts, for creating contacts, are much needed in a space that still is on the purview to find like important works of art, right? And but there's a certain interesting dynamic in the Web3 space as well, right? Because it's the acceleration of participation. And there is this permanent participation because this is how you build and participate in communities, right? Without that, it's just kind of, you're going to be excluded. So I think that's a very important aspect. And so I think that's very much critical.
It's interesting because you obviously just mentioned collectors, right? As almost like as curators as well. And that's also what happens in the Web3 space because of this active participation from everybody, really, from the community, the role of the curator in a way becomes everyone and anyone. And so maybe even more important to like figure out, what is the role of the curator in Web3 and what shape does that take?
Yeah, this is an excellent point, and I would have an example for it. I mean, there is this collective organic material that actually started their inauguration of their initial drop on Tezos, which has been founded by this fabulous artist, Guy Nicholas, and he put together a couple of the artists, and it was just fantastic to see because it was such a diverse group of traditional and digital native artists. They came together to come up with a stellar collection. And in the process, what they did is they educated themselves, right, on how the work should be done. They curated the space. It was almost like a Web3 version of an artist-curated gallery, right? And during the process, I was very amazed also about sort of the diligence, the care for the art, but also the execution of a series of Twitter spaces. And I think this is also part of a curatorial service, is where the artists interviewed each other about the work, about the depth of the work, and provided pretty much insights to the work to potential collectors prior to the drop. And I thought it's amazing, and the team continues working on that. I mean,
Linda, I know you're nodding, and yeah, this is very core to also like what the work that you do. So would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because I think it can be scary to think that the identity of the curator is expanding to like anyone, anywhere, with all kinds of art. But I think what happens is that I think it's very exciting for many reasons. For one being that the artist as the curator is actually starting to sort of happen more in the Web3 space. There are a lot of artists who are sort of taking on that mantle of curator and organizing shows and really giving words to the movement of the Web3 space from their own perspective and sort of putting the art and the artist forward. But also, I think I really like this idea that there's like in an ever expanding and like exponentially growing space where you have like thousands and artists coming into the space every day. As a collector or even as an artist, you have to sort of figure out where to align yourself, which communities to join. And I think the curator becomes that sort of beacon of subjectivity. Like you can figure out like what your thesis is or which communities you want to align with. And generally those are the people speaking for those communities. And so they can help you sort of navigate this like very vast and very fast growing space. So I think they're like little lights. Curators have become little lights that you find your way through the Twitter sphere to figure out which artists you should speak to, which collectors you should be following, and if you're a community person, which communities you should be joining.
maybe if I may, just one point. Being in the music industry for such a long time, I think NFT artists have like sort of similarity to this because they need to entertain larger audiences. It's not just a one-on-one. It's just basically the constant interaction with wider audiences. So I find it so fascinating, and there's definitely a parallel world to that.
Yeah, I think what I was thinking just now was you were all speaking is, we've used the word community, we've used the word Twitter Spaces, we've used the word engaging with an audience, which maybe like historically in, the view of an artist, you would kind of like think of an artist as, doing art, and then everybody, the gallerist, the curator, the institution taking that, heavy lifting off the artist and doing all the work, even behind closed doors sometimes. Like you don't really know what happens. And I think that's when the word of like the concept of gatekeeping, starts, and how historically, like I kind of remember when we started using the word curator in the NFT space, you couldn't really use it. You had to be very careful because artists were like, oh, no. Like, I don't want a curator. I'm here because I don't want to be gate-kept. So yeah, what do you feel about, maybe Sabine, I'll start with you, like the concept of the curator as gatekeeper?
Well, I see myself different. I see myself as a facilitator and not as a gatekeeper. But as been mentioned before, of course, curators in the Web3 space are sort of nodes, also for guidance and so on. My experience was working with media arts in such a long time. The curator always has been a moderator between various parties, the artists, but then also technicians you have to work with, mediating to the audience, making them understand what they actually see, how to interact sometimes, and so on. And I think also as a cultural institution, we want to also establish a DAO, a Hack DAO in the fall. And I think that the art institution needs to open up to stay relevant. That's for me a very important topic. How can we reach out to new audiences? This gatekeeping issue is also an issue in terms of collecting. When you have software-based art, we need programmers, we need people from outside who have written programs that we can use to keep the art alive. And in that respect, it's also opening up, not being this closed doors to an audience where we know how it is working. We need to connect more, and I think also in curatorial, it's this opening up, inviting people in, becoming a DAO, hopefully have meaningful interactions with an audience in a community that we want to build.
Absolutely. Linda, what are your thoughts on the notion of curators as gatekeepers, specifically also from an artist perspective as well?
Yeah, for sure. I think if you are a curator who's like staunchly defending the old canons of art history, you're probably going to feel very lonely and very alienated in the Web3 space, because I think what curators are really doing in this space, from what I've been observing, is that they're expanding this idea of what the art world is supposed to be and supposed to do and who gets to be represented in. So that's both on in terms of in mediums of the work, and defending new mediums and constantly evolving. So things like generative art. But also in terms of the identities that get to be represented in collections and who gets to have a seat at the table in terms of artists. So for me, it's kind of a refreshing change, because from having been briefly in the sort of traditional art space as an artist and sort of having interacted with curators who almost want to fit a circle into a square, what happens in the Web3 space is that you can find, these different nodes for guidance. They have different curatorial perspectives. Every artist across different mediums, across different identities, can find a niche of a niche community that they can belong to, and I think that's a very important thing to uphold and continue to foster. And I think specifically speaking about platforms, right? When you think about NFT platforms, at first there was this idea that every platform is uncurated, but I think whenever you're showing art, you're curated by default, whether you're actually intentionally curating your front page or not. Your curation happens, right? And so I think a lot of platforms are starting to take that a bit more seriously and figuring out, well, if I'm going to be curating unintentionally, maybe I should sort of start to do so a bit more intentionally. And what does that mean for me? And you're starting to find every platform is starting to develop their curatorial sort of ethos and building around that. And I'm really excited to see how that progresses over time, and also continues to sort of serve this purpose of decentralization.
Definitely.
Can I add just different not additional perspective? I think just the term gatekeeping is such a loaded term, and often projected with so much negative connotation. And I think in the discussion, and I 100% agree that there is sort of the ethos of inclusivity, right? And that the scene is pretty much committed, or very much committed, to enable and provide opportunity to all. But I think we should not confuse it with the striving for quality and excellence, especially in an overcharged space, right? So I think there is a certain framework, or any systems needs a framework to operate and function in an efficient way. And I think curators can do it by also enable pretty much the conversation and the dialogue with art. But I think striving for quality is still a very critical point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, on this quality point, I know that with Hack specifically, you've been collecting NFTs and art NFTs specifically. And so when you think about like collecting in the NFT space, specifically for like an institution, what is that, kind of maybe on the term quality or, things, points that you have to consider when building a collection for such an institution, Sabine?
Well, of course, it's also the quality issue and the topics addressed. I'm building the collection for Hack is really looking at the issues that are discussed in the artworks. And just to make it clear, we only collect art NFTs. I know that other institutions have a different approach. We are also limited because of our governmental funding to collect only Swiss media art. So that makes a bit a more narrow niche for what we can do. And the first two NFTs that we collected are by the artist group Übermorgen. And it's a PFP project with the dicks that they realized, and we bought two of them. And for me, it made sense because we have them in the collection with one of their seminal net artworks, The Sounds of eBay. They did a lot of work on these huge companies, Amazon, eBay, and Google. And for me, that was very relevant how they were interfering with the artwork on kind of critiquing also the infrastructures of the internet. And of course, with their NFT project, it was also kind of not only critiquing, but also an ironic gesture on the phenomena of profile pictures. So in the concept of our collection, it totally makes sense to acquire these works for the collection. And I think it will be driven again in thinking of the different topics that are addressed, conceptually, abstract, content-wise. That is something that interests me in collecting.
Just a follow-up question specifically to this. Do you think it's easy or hard to find context and understand more about art NFTs specifically? Do you think the infrastructure for an institution like Hack and others to have context on specific art NFTs is there yet, or has still to be built?
I think you have to engage, and you have to see and look and experience to build that. But that's also why we want to start with a talk series in the fall to educate our audience, because that's also what we as an institution, this is one of our duties, to really make people understand. And we want to start also with workshops, because I think it's very important when you enter into the Web3 space and collecting NFTs, you have to do it. So a year ago, we started also with two artists that we are related with and who we work with, who were minting kind of during the workshop and really go through every step to make people understand how it works. Because my experience is that a lot of people are still shying away and not really doing it. And I think we need to start there.
Absolutely. And Linda, with Cyberbat specifically, how do you work in a world where you're decentralized, you're a decentralized autonomous organization? How do you curate work? How do you select your artists? And how does that process look like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think think I'm gonna preface saying that in the NFT space, they're expected to be like a whole team of people. You're expected to be your own publicist, your own agent, your own marketing manager. You're expected to make the work. You're expected to sort of be the Twitter influencer that gets the message across and to write the context and everything around it. And it's an incredibly time-consuming job. And I think a lot of artists don't have all of those skills at their disposal, which is why I think sometimes the space disproportionately affects artists who are not able to sort of really put words to their or give context to their work. It's not easy, which is why in the traditional art space you have curators and you have publicists and you have everything, that whole team working to sort of really bring context around the work. And so what we try to do at Cyberbot is to find artists who need that, right? So like they have a beautiful collection, they have very expansive practices, and they may not have the time to sort of spend like actually crafting the narrative around their work and actually crafting the experiences where people can see and interact with their work. And so what we sort of started to do at the beginning is we started with a small cohort of artists of all of African descent, and we were agnostic of mediums, and we said we just want to find people who are committed to their practice, and we want to sort of bring light to their works and sort of help them bring context. So that's kind of organizing exhibitions around the work, curating different exhibitions based on the cohort that we have. So we're working with a very specific group of about 30 artists. And what we've seen is that it makes a huge difference, because you go from kind of being invisible on Twitter and having this massive amount of like excellent work that people can resonate with to after a couple of exhibitions, people know your name, people are soliciting you for other projects because there's visibility and there's context finally to like attach to the work and to the person. And so that's something we really care about. In terms of kind of getting more artists in, one thing we're realizing is that, again, as a DAO, right, I can't make that decision as the founder to say, we need more artists now. We have to be able to continue to do the same level of work that we've been able to do with 30 artists, with like 100 artists. And so when we're not confident that we can ramp up these efforts, we just kind of don't let anyone in until, we've onboarded more people who are able to sort of do this work of contextualizing and organizing experiences around the work. And so far we haven't let anyone in yet, but our goal between now and the end of the year is to build the systems to allow more artists to come into experience some of the work we've been doing for the first cohort of 30.
Amazing. And I guess like in the context specifically also like for DAOs, but also in general for like curators, we're obviously talking about blockchain and smart contracts. And so in all of your views, how do you think the technology that is behind NFTs and which are smart contracts can enable curators and maybe gallerists, institutions to facilitate some of those transactions, work, percentages, how those models work now, let's say?
Sure. Can I first of all say I'm super impressed, Linda. I mean, big fan of the work, and also I'm so thrilled about DAOs, guys. I'm so excited. I just wanted to express it. And then beyond arts, right? I mean, this is going to be transformational for everything. I mean, I think in politics, in corporates in the future. So I mean, it's such a wonderful field. And what I also believe it's going to create the bridge pretty much between sort of what we call the NFT art and probably also the traditional art, because there are a lot of DAOs that have traditional curators, museum creators already on their DAOs that have a voting right, that are part of it, and then ultimately you create a foundation, a collection that will find a way to a MoMA, right? So I think this is so critical to mention here. Now, back to your question, sorry. About blockchain, I mean, the wonderful thing about blockchain is that it's such a transparent ledger. So you have all the data at hand that you need about the transaction of a collection, how, the trading volume, everything else. So basically, not being too technical, but you can create a data lake. Once you have a data lake, you can apply data analytics, you can harvest a lot of information. So through all of that, you can make sort of these finding a stick in a hay, you can just kind of make the entire work so much more professional for a curator. And this is very exciting to me. So blockchain pretty much enables that.
Sabine?
Well, as you said it, I mean, the transparency and the NFT as a certificate really, created that hype and that burst that digital art is now collected. I mean, we collected long times ago very very complex works that are sitting on the web, that are using web infrastructure, for example, connecting to the to Google search engine and so on. These works are for us more complex, but I'm happy to see that through blockchain technology, there's a market now for digital art, and digital art gets more attention from the wider art world. We sit here in a booth at Art Basel, so I think that's very positive. And I totally agree that the transparency issue is super interesting and helps understand. And and it also enables, as we spoke earlier, that these collections and curators come up because it's all transparent. You can look at the spaces and you see what people are doing.
And Linda, specifically, maybe also to talk about like DAOs and Cyberbat. Maybe you want to give a little bit of context on how Cyberbat started and how the blockchain actually facilitated your funding for you to start the DAO, because there's a lot of talk around. Let's say like big money, PFPs, but actually, sometimes the bright side of blockchain and organizations like Cyberbat and many others are things that not really get talked about too much. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we started very grassroots in the sense that we first organized around our own resources. So we're all, for the most part, artists and curators. And so either we're making some, cryptocurrencies from selling our art or royalties, or maybe if you're a curator, kind of being paid for that job. So we started with our own resources. We just pooled a little bit of ETH each and said let's kind of create our safe, get a bit of money in it, and start to use that to apply to be at events and conferences, because we were finding that artists of African descent were just not being invited to NFT events. And you might feature a couple of us, but then we needed a space where we just wanted to kind of present ourselves and say we're here, we exist, and we kind of like the work that we do, and I think we think you're going to like it too. And so eventually we realized for our ambitions to be met, we actually needed to fundraise. And so what we did, typically DAOs will fundraise with a token drop, but I think there's a fine line when you're a DAO of artists, when it comes to thinking about governance, right? Who gets to make decisions about art and who gets to make decisions about your work? It's just such a personal thing. And so as we were working through the governance, we decided maybe not a token drop, not yet, because we are not ready to sort of monetize this aspect of ourselves. And so we decided to say, we're really good at making paintings and one-of-one art. We're really good at that. It's something we know how to do. It's something we know how to market. So we basically did a little manifesto of who we were, what we were trying to do, and we along with that, you could collect one-of-ones by some of our artists, and the proceeds from that would go in part to the artists who made the artwork, but also the rest would go to the DAO, and that's how we were able to fund our way through Digital Art Fair Asia. Or Art Dubai this year as well, last year as well, and Art Fair Philippines. We've been able to sort of use what we've raised to sort of travel to different places and to show that, the NFT space is not just, your PFPs, it's not just your typically like, Western creators, like we're also here and we also have a different perspective. And I think there was a question you asked earlier about smart contract, and I think a reason why I want to bring them up is because that's something as Cyberbot we're trying to do a bit more, is to kind of mint all our collections on our own smart contracts and give the right split to the artists, obviously. And the reason for that is because every once in a while, I think, technology is great, but every once in a while you have a piece of technology that's like poised to change history. And I think in many ways the smart contract is that for us. So if I think about myself, I'm a woman, right? If you go back 200, 300 years into history and you try to sort of name the women who shaped the time, it's hard to find the names, right? Like, unless you're an art historian. And the reason for that is because like a lot of work by female artists at the time has been attributed to their male counterparts. And so you have this just like identities that get lost through history. And with the smart contract, you have the transparency and the ledger that cements the presence of this person in the NFT space and in this art movement. So, even if I stop doing anything today, in 100 years, 200 years from now, like, there will be a proof that I was around and that I minted those NFTs myself. And I think that's historical for someone like me. I may never be forgotten, right? Like, at least there's evidence that I existed. And I think that's revolutionary and something we definitely want to keep, want to protect.
Absolutely. I love that you closed with that. I do want to open it up to questions. To give a bit of time. So yeah, if there's any question, there's a mic somewhere.
Thank you for this wonderful presentation. First of all, I'm Ozzy from FX Hash, and I had a question for whoever wants to respond to it. As you've seen, both the traditional art scene and the NFT space, and since community members are fastly becoming curators, in what extent should we, as Web3 art platforms and traditional curators, educate or pave the way for the community on curation techniques, or should we sit back and watch the community figure out curation techniques that are also new to us that we don't know yet?
Yeah, you said it. Great question. I just attest that. Thank you for that. I think, to be honest, everything starts with a dialogue. And you don't want to push anybody into anything. What you want to encourage is pretty much the curiosity, right, around the dialogue, the conversation, learning from each other, right? So very short answer in that. Yeah, there should be sort of opportunities to learn from each other. Maybe also take those communities and facilitate diverse thoughts and opinions into those, right? This is where innovation and creation starts.
Yeah, I can I can agree. That's what we are trying, is really to educate, to reach out, to create opportunities. And I think the DAO that we want to establish, the Hack DAO, will be one of those experiments also. And I think also we as an institution will learn by doing it.
Any other questions? Or Linda, do you want to add anything to this specifically?
I was just going to agree with Robert. Dialogue, just, you can't and won't stop curators from propping up everywhere, but organizing dialogue around these two different perspectives is, I think, the way to go.
I work in crypto, and I have heard all major terms or used. The only one I'm missing is fractionalizing ownership. And I would like to ask you how it's affecting the art collection. So owning 1% of a painting, or maybe owning a percentage of a collection in a liquidity pool, or like.
I mean, this happened already, also not only in crypto, with the artist Eve Sussman, for example, who sold her painting to fractionalized owners. I think it's an interesting concept and probably might be also something with high prices to continue in the future. I don't know if that answers your question or if you had a...
Yeah, I think so. So if you think like from casual to professional, right? I think you, when you look at the Deutsche Börse, which is a big exchange marketplace, they have their own sort of stock market for fractionalized goods, right? And so usually really just kind of established collectors, founders come in and take their entire collection of traditional art, tokenizing it, therefore fractionalizing it. Sorry, and starting to trade that, right? So that exists already also in a very professional context, yeah?
I think there was one question there.
Yeah. And I think for...
Go ahead, Linda.
Sorry, go ahead, Linda.
Okay, should I ask this question or is Linda going to say something?
There might be a lag. I was saying for DAO...
Go for it, Linda. There's a bit of a lag, but you're here.
Go ahead. Okay. No, I was just going to say for DAOs, fractionalized ownership is almost like a given, because when we collect artwork as a DAO, we kind of have to find a way to like split it within every member. And so I think it's almost an inevitable mechanic if you collect together in a DAO infrastructure. And it's something I'm really interested in and excited about, because especially when there's artworks we couldn't afford as like an individual, you now have the possibility to sort of pool your resources together, and being able to afford that means that you're sort of, you know, this, when we came into the NFT space, there was this idea that you could build generational wealth through the NFT space, but there are really not a lot of ways you can do that. And I think fractionalized ownership is like at least one possible answer to that.
I think we have time for one more question, so yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was wondering, what do you think, where will be the spaces of digital art to happen? Like, especially, will it be more like online, and which spaces online, or will it be also in a physical space? And where lies the potential of institutions maybe, or where do you think is the most interesting spaces that actually this art or the digital art will happen in the future? Will it be the metaverse, or how do you say, commercial metaverses, or will people build their own spaces? So where do you think it goes in this way?
Maybe I start. I think it will happen everywhere. That's what my early example was with Adi Wagenknecht, that art infiltrates existing spaces. But of course, we also will build spaces. I mean, for example, at Hack, we will have an online exhibition space based on the common garden principle or concept of Constant Dullard. And I personally believe in browser-based spaces because they are accessible to everyone, but of course there will also be metaverse spaces like Decentraland or Mozilla Hub. So I think we will diversify.
I think we're at time, unfortunately. But thank you very much. Thanks to everybody who came and listened. Thanks, Linda. Thanks, Sabine. And thanks, Robert.